One peaceful afternoon, Clint Barton, Hawkeye, teaches his daughter archery on their farm. In the distance, his wife prepares a nice picnic for the entire family. As Clint goes to pick up the arrow that his daughter shot, he turns around, and all of a sudden, they are nowhere to be found, much like half of all life in the universe, after Thanos wiped them from existence. After the events of Infinity War, Tony Stark and Nebula, the only surviving folks from the ambush in Titan, try to head back home, only to be stranded millions of light years away from Earth. With no supplies left, on what is presumably his last day alive, Tony leaves a message for his fiancée. He passes out from starvation and exhaustion soon after, and Nebula carries him to the seat of the captain. On the brink of passing out, all of a sudden, help comes in the form of Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel, who takes their ship and returns them to Earth, where they are reunited with what is left of the Avengers: Natasha Romanoff, Bruce Banner, Steve Rogers, Thor, James Rhodes, and the last surviving Guardian of the Galaxy, Rocket. With all of them back together, they try to hatch a plan to reverse what Thanos has done. All they need to do is find Thanos, take the gauntlet, and snap their fingers to bring everything back to normal again. Luckily for them, just 2 days before this, they detected a massive power surge on a faraway planet, the Garden. With Thanos' location locked, the group ambush him, but much to their shock, they find that the stones have been destroyed. The power surge they detected was him using the stones to destroy the stones, so that nobody could undo his work. Enraged by this, Thor beheads Thanos. 5 years after these events, everyone has gone their separate ways. Steve Rogers, still being the Captain America that he is, serves in a support group for those that lost people when Thanos snapped his fingers. He tries to help people move on, but when he comes back to the Avengers headquarters, he finds his dear friend Natasha unable to do so. Even with Thanos gone, and no immediate threat to the universe, she keeps the headquarters afloat by maintaining contact with the remaining survivors that are now dispersed everywhere. Just before Rogers sees her, however, Nat speaks to Rhodes, who informs her that he has found Clint again, still on a rampage somewhere. Tearfully, she tells Rhodes to keep an eye on him, just as Rogers enters the room to check up on her. As the two talk about moving on, out at the front gate, there arrives a man, but it isn't just any man. It's Ant-Man. Just moments before this, in a storage unit, a rat accidentally activates a strange machine inside a van. When it opens, Scott Lang, Ant-Man, emerges. He leaves the building and tries to look for his family, only to find out that half the population has been wiped out, including Hope, his partner, who was supposed to pull him out of the machine. Despite this, however, he finds out that his daughter survived and is all grown up. He heads straight to the Avengers headquarters to tell Rogers and Romanoff that only 5 hours have passed for him in the quantum realm. Time works differently there, explains Lang, and that means that they still have a shot to reverse what Thanos did by going back in time. But they need the brains to enact this plan. So, the group goes on to visit Tony Stark, who is now happily married to Pepper and has a lovely daughter. They try to sell the idea of creating a time heist to go back and take the stone from Thanos. Stark, who now has everything he wants, declines, in fear of risking what he has. Later that night, however, he reflects upon the loss of Peter Parker and just tries to test some theoretical models that would work with Lang's proposal. Without really meaning to, he finds one that works. Right as he does so, his daughter comes down, and the two hang out for a bit before he tucks her into bed, to which she tells her dad that she loves him 3000. Stark jokingly brags about this to Pepper before telling her that he figured out time travel. He is convinced that he doesn't want to do it, but Pepper manages to persuade him into helping everyone else who wasn't as lucky as them. Just like that, Stark is on board, for the sake of all the people that didn't get to experience what he has now, and for Peter. Meanwhile, the rest of what's left of the Avengers try to regroup and find the others that survived Thanos' snap. Steve, Nat, and Scott find out that after some soul-searching and a bit of science, Bruce and the Hulk are now one and the same, basically just mixing the brains and the brawn together. Far to the east, Barton, whose entire family was snapped by Thanos, has also gone through his own soul-searching journey. The only difference is that he's finding that by murdering thousands of others in the guise of the vigilante, Ronan, who massacres criminal cartels and gangs. Luckily, Nat finds him and is able to convince him to go back, on the promise that there is a chance to bring his family back from the ashes. Sadly, we can't really give the same promise to the great god of thunder, Thor. Banner and Rocket hitchhike to go and pick him up from New Asgard, a small fishing village, now inhabited by what survived of the Asgardians after their migration, Thanos' attack, and the snap. They run into Valkyrie, who informs them that the god of thunder isn't doing well. That's really an understatement. Consumed by his grief, Thor has plunged into a depression. He has become overweight, unkempt, and an alcoholic who spends his free time playing video games with his friends Meek and Korg. When Banner tries to ask him how he's doing, he merely deflects, saying that it was him that ended Thanos, not anyone else. He is the strongest Avenger, after all. Despite that, Thor is evidently still shaken by the thought of Thanos, but after some convincing from Rocket and Banner, he begrudgingly agrees to regroup with the Avengers. With the rest of the gang back together, they all brainstorm ways to effectively execute the plan. They only have a very limited amount of PIM particles, enough for just one two-way trip each, plus a practice run. Upon discussing the locations and characteristics of all of the stones, they realize that they just need 3 teams, as 3 of the stones, the Time Stone, the Space Stone, and the Mind Stone, are in New York in 2012. Another group heads to Asgard for the Reality Stone, while another heads over to Vormir for the Soul Stone. After a successful test run, they execute their plan. Banner, Rogers, Lang, and Stark head over to 2012 New York, just after the battle with Loki, to retrieve the stones. Banner heads straight to the Sanctum Sanctorum, where he meets the Ancient One. He tries to convince her to give him the Time Stone that was still in her possession at the time, but she refuses, even going as far as incapacitating him. But once he drops the kicker that in the original timeline, it was Doctor Strange that gave Thanos the Time Stone willingly after seeing into the future. The Ancient One gives the stone to Banner, under the promise that they must return all the stones back where they got them. Meanwhile, in another part of New York, Stark and Lang head to the place where the rest of the Avengers are arresting Loki. Once he's cuffed and apprehended, the group take the elevator, but given Hulk's size, he's forced to take the stairs, which angers him. Stark flicks a shrunken Lang into his own past self, while Rogers waits on a different floor to receive the Mind Stone, after the Avengers from the past surrender the Tesseract, containing the Space Stone, and the Mind Control Scepter that contains the Mind Stone to S.H.I.E.L.D., who, at the time, they did not know were working for Hydra. Rogers uses this to get them to surrender the scepter. Once the rest of the Avengers who have the Tesseract reach the ground floor, Lang gives Stark a mild cardiac arrest by pulling a circuit in his artificial heart, which prompts him to drop the case with the Tesseract. Stark sneaks this away, but as he approaches the stairs, the Hulk bursts through and smashes it open, throwing him and the case back. The case opens in front of Loki, and while the rest of the group from the past are preoccupied with Stark having a heart attack, he uses it to warp elsewhere. Meanwhile, Rogers runs into his past self, who is convinced that he is Loki in disguise. The two battle it out, and the Rogers of the future is able to subdue his past self using the scepter. Once Lang, Rogers, and Stark regroup, they try to figure out a way to grab the Space Stone without running out of their very limited supply of PIM particle. Stark figures out that by traveling to a U.S. Army installation in the 1970s, they will not only get the Space Stone, but they'll also be able to nab PIM particles. Well, they narrowly succeed, and during that time, Stark actually runs into his father, and they have a meaningful conversation about parenthood, and Rogers sees his long-lost love, Peggy Carter, who still keeps a photo of him on her desk, which he finds as he is busy stealing some PIM particles. Meanwhile, up in the once beautiful land of Asgard, Rocket and Thor struggle to get the Reality Stone from Thor's ex-girlfriend. Thor gets cold feet as they're about to do the deed, but he suddenly bumps into his mother, who is destined to lose her life that day. Being raised by witches, she immediately knows that the Thor she is facing is from a different future. He tries saving her, but she accepts her fate anyway. Just then, Rocket comes running to him, after being able to extract the Reality Stone. Before they warp out, Thor reaches out his hand, and after a few moments, Mjolnir comes to his hand, much to Thor's happiness, upon discovering that even after all that time, he is still worthy. Meanwhile, Nebula and Rhodes are assigned to take the Power Stone. The two travel to the time Quill was still in the process of stealing the stone from a protected chamber in Morag. As they stand guard, however, Nebula tells Rhodes that Quill wasn't the only one on Morag that day. There was Gamora and her past self as well. Speaking of, back in Thanos' ship, Thanos finds the location of the Power Stone. As he tells his daughters Nebula and Gamora to retrieve it for him, Nebula glitches, and her past self, still in Thanos' ship, shows the video capture of her future self. With two of Nebula's consciousness operating on a single system, Thanos and Ma discover that there is a future Nebula. Future Nebula tries warning the others, but Thanos scans her memories remotely, and he is able to uncover the Avengers' plans. With that, Thanos sends back past Nebula to capture future Nebula and infiltrate the present as a spy. With the power, mind, reality, space, and time stones retrieved, all that's left now is the Soul Stone, but Barton and Nat are caught in a horrible predicament. Much like the deal the Red Skull offered Thanos, they must trade the soul of someone they love in order to retrieve the stone. At first, they question the deal, saying that it's a bluff, but when Nat recalls the events of Infinity War, and how Thanos went there with his daughter and left with only the Soul Stone, she becomes less and less convinced that they are both going to make it out alive. Once this becomes clear, Barton tells her that he's the one that needs to go, especially after all that he's done. Nat hushes him, tells him that he still has his family to take care of, before sprinting towards the cliff. Barton subdues Nat, but she still manages to jump off. He catches her at the last minute, but she tearfully makes him let go, before falling to her demise. With Nat gone, Barton awakens in the pool near the cliff, holding the Soul Stone. Back in the present time, the Avengers are shaken that Barton returned alone, but with the stones all together. They craft a gauntlet similar to what Thanos created, and because of his size and genetic makeup, they have Banner make the snap to return everyone. Banner is badly injured by this, but a few moments after the snap, Barton's phone starts ringing. It's his wife. Their plan worked. But their joy doesn't last long, as Thanos bombs their entire headquarters from above. Turns out, as all this was happening, Nebula from the past has infiltrated them and used their quantum time machine to bring Thanos' ship and army. With the team split up across the rubble, they must find a way to keep the gauntlet protected. Luckily, it fell into the vicinity of Barton, who immediately starts running away from the fierce alien dogs that are after it. Outside, Thanos begins his preparations. Nebula from the past goes over to him, and he instructs her to find the gauntlet while he waits. Meanwhile, back in his ship, Nebula from the present tries to reason with Gamora. When Gamora asks, Nebula tells her that they've been through a lot, from trying to hurt each other to eventually becoming sisters. Since Gamora was already feeling shaky about Thanos' plan around this time, Gamora helps Nebula, and the two head to Ground Zero to protect the gauntlet. They eventually find it, just as Nebula from the past is about to steal it from Barton. This encounter eventually ends up with present Nebula driving a bullet through her past self. Meanwhile, Thor, Rogers, and Stark confront Thanos head-on, after he tells them that his plan has now changed. Their actions have convinced him that he can't just wipe out half the universe. He needs to make all life disappear and create a new universe that is grateful for his so-called gift. Though it's 3 against 1, all of them are still beaten one by Thanos alone. Despite this, Thor is elated to find out that just like what he thought before, Rogers is now worthy to wield Mjolnir, which he uses to take Thanos off guard. But being able to swing around a magic hammer is not enough. Thanos still eventually knocks 2 out of the 3 Avengers out, while Rogers himself is forced to stand before him, all bloody and with a broken shield. Just when it seems like all hope is lost, Rogers hears a choppy message from his earpiece. On his left, a portal opens, and from Wakanda, the one and only King T'Challa steps out with his army, as well as the rest of the Avengers. With the gauntlet now retrieved, they have to find a way to return all the stones before Thanos can even reach them. Thanos realizes their plan and tries to wrestle with them to get the gauntlet. Eventually, he comes across an enraged Wanda, who binds him with her energy. With that, Thanos has his own troops rain heavy fire on the ground, despite the damage to their own soldiers. The Avengers are almost caught in another tight stretch, until Captain Marvel appears and destroys Thanos' ship. Thanos is eventually able to catch the gauntlet. However, Captain Marvel manages to wrestle him just enough to prevent him from snapping. When she is eventually subdued, Stark sees Strange looking at him. With his one free hand, Strange signals that this moment, is the one chance they had in the 14 million possible outcomes. With that, Stark lunges headfirst at Thanos, trying to take the glove from him, but Thanos easily throws him back. Just like that, Thanos snaps his fingers again. But nothing happens. He looks up, looks at Stark, who now has all 6 of the stones in his own suit. He triumphantly says, "I am Iron Man," before snapping his fingers. Then, within seconds, Thanos' entire army, and he himself, turn into ash. With the sheer power of the stone's radiation, however, half of Stark's body is severely injured. Moments away from losing his life, Parker runs to him, and Pepper, his wife, comforts him and tells him that he can rest now. They're going to be okay. With that, the light in Tony's heart fades away. After this battle, the Avengers hold an intimate funeral for their friend. Barton and Wanda, though they've lost some people, take solace in the fact that they won. Thor later tells Valkyrie that she is the new Queen of Asgard, before hopping aboard the ship of the Guardians of the Galaxy to find his purpose. Parker reunites with his friends in school. Barton goes home to his family. Once all of this is settled, Rogers takes up the difficult task of going back to the past to return the stones where they belong and ensure the timeline is corrected, as they promised the Ancient One they would. He takes 5 seconds off of the present time on his time machine, but when Banner signals the moment he should return, Rogers doesn't come back. Or at least, not exactly. Just a few feet away from them, Sam and Bucky notice that there is an old man sitting on a bench. The two approach him, and Sam realizes that the man he is looking at is none other than Steve Rogers. He goes to him, and learns that he took up Tony's advice to get a life, by remaining in the past and spending it with the love of his life, Peggy Carter. With Steve Rogers now retiring from being Captain America, he hands over his shield and mantle to Sam, telling him that he is Captain America now.